Hi, I am Diana Page Jordan, and with me today is Kelly Morgan. She is the creator of the Improvisational Writing Method. Improvisational Writing Method. Now, Kelly, tell it. When I hear improv, I think comedian, but that's not what you do. What do you do?
Yeah, I want to broaden that definition of improvisation to musicians, actors, dramatic actors, and writers. So improv is not necessarily about writing comedy, but it is about getting into the moment and creating story.
How did you come up with this?
One of the things that happened, I mean, I was a journalism major and I always wanted to be a writer when I was young. I know you loved reading books, and so did I.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I ran into Julia Cameron, and she had written a book called Healing the Artist Within. And she came to my house to deliver it, and we started talking. And she said, by the way, that book is now The Artist's Way, which is a internationally best-selling book. At that time, it was not even called that. And she came to my house and she said, Kelly, what would you be if you could be anything? And I said, I would love to be a writer. And at that time, I was repping artists. And I would tell them, you're the creative one, not me. And Julia looked around my house and she saw this upside down umbrella in the dining room that I had created and all the colorful walls. And she said, Kelly, I think you might be very creative. And then she said, and no one had told me that in a long, long time. And so I thought, yeah. And she said, I might be what they call a shadow artist. And a shadow artist is someone who shadows a real artist. Instead of being the real artist themselves, they help real artists. So we marry the real artist. We sell the real artist's work. We assist them instead of being it ourselves. So not long after Julia and I met, and I was very inspired by that, I thought, I'm going to start writing. And I took a class at a local university in Chicago. And oh man, I worked so hard to do those assignments. And the teacher held up my paper in front of the class and she said, what's wrong with you? Why can't you write?
Ouch.
Right next to my desk, right up in front of the class. So it was 5 years before I wrote again.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
And
that's just wrong with that guy.
well, it was.
But maybe there's a silver lining, right?
There's a silver. Thank you. Thank you for saying. Yeah. Most people don't get that. There ended up being a silver lining. I didn't write for a long time.
Yeah.
And I was getting sober and I did journal and I started getting in touch with my feelings. And finally I went back and I thought, gosh, I want to write, and I want to write about all these guys that are doing me wrong songs. I call them my country western poems. Anyway, I was just having a lot of trouble dating. I was in my 30s. And so I started writing these things, and the director of my ad agency, I was a copywriter there. She says, well, maybe you ought to work with Laurel Ann Bogan, who happened to be voted best performance poet by the LA Weekly in '89.
Huh.
And I thought, oh, performance poet, I don't know what that is, but I sent in my work. She accepted me anyway. I was really bad. And I thought it was great, but it was, looking back, not that great. And she accepted me. And the first time I ever went and saw her read, she had one of those little 1940s hats with the net, and she just belted out this poetry. And I thought, oh man. And I was so inspired, and I thought, I want to do that. And I started writing poetry and reading it. There was a whole poetry scene in LA and spoken word. And there's nothing like a live audience to train you in writing.
How about, yeah.
Yeah, because when someone yawns, when someone leaves the room, when they clap, when they give you a standing ovation and come up and tell you how much they loved it, it gave me an idea of how to write in a way that was clear that had some structure to it that people could follow, that was entertaining. And most of all, the first time I got a standing ovation, it was a poem about my grandmother waiting. It was from a letter where she was just waiting in the house and the snow was coming in from a hole in the roof.
Mm.
So it was writing about something that was really vulnerable and really important to me.
Yeah.
And that's what taught me to write. So when I started teaching writing classes, I wanted to do it in a way that would encourage people to write rather than discourage them. And by the way, what I learned from that first teacher who said, "What's wrong with you? Why can't you write?" The silver lining
Yeah.
was, I think she might have been, she spoke in another language. She might have been saying, just be yourself.
Yeah.
Write about what's important to you. Don't be clever. Just try to, just put on the page what's coming. So I thought, at this time, I'm teaching the Artist Way in LA. I thought, I just want to do a writing class where people come in and they write, and then we read it out loud. And as the years went on, I started bringing in a lot of the tools of improvisational writing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not where you get up in front of the class and perform. It's more like we write, we share, we develop a very close-knit group who tells you what they're hearing that's working. They ask you questions. No critical feedback, because we're not at that stage of the writing process. We're only generating at that stage. And so that's what my improvisational writing classes are. And I've taken them online now.
Wow, that's so awesome. So how does it work? Do you give them like a cue, like okay, we're going to do a story. We're going to do stories all about something tonight, or do you just let people write what they want to write, or how's it work?
Well, it's a combination. There are people that have come into these classes and they've written whole books out of what they've done there. There's new writers that have never written before. And there's also writers who are just a little bit burned out. Like the woman I was talking to this morning is a professor. She's written books, or in psychology today, she writes for, but she had gotten away from the creativity. So I do a combination. I usually do some kind of a warm-up, free writing. And then in the second half, I use something that teaches structure of creating a story. And we free write with that using structure. So you can write about anything. You can write about something happening in your own life. You can just sit down and go, what do I want to write about? And let it come up. Or you can write about whatever's going on in your book. You can write the next scene and see if you can draw from the prompt.
Very good. So what I'm getting from you right now is there's no right or wrong. It's just about writing.
There's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
There's no even, although sometimes people go, I love what you wrote, or I hate what you wrote. None of that helps us continue to write. What helps us continue to write is, oh, well, what happened then? What really impacted me is that she was wearing a purple shirt and she put her face down and started crying. When we let people know what impacts us about their writing, they tend to write more of that. They tend to want to build on that. So we ask those questions.
Wow. It's very evocative.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about a moment in one of your classes where you knew you struck gold, where it just worked and you just knew it, and the writer knew it.
So many times. I'll just go back to when I first started teaching it. I was teaching early days of improv writing, and a woman named Eileen came into the class, and her husband had just died of a heart attack. And she wrote about that the first night using the prompt I gave, and not in the creative exercise, but in the prompt. And then the second night she wrote about it. In those days, they were 8 weeks long. So she did it every night. And on the last night, she did it from every prompt I gave. And on the last night, it was the most moving story. This woman wasn't trying to be a writer. It just was, it told it from a real true place inside her, and with some technique, and the whole room, we were ready to cry. And so she didn't have to come back anymore. For her, it was about coming to understand an event in her life. So the epiphany there was that whether we're writing fiction or nonfiction, when we write, we begin to understand our own lives more. And that was one of my epiphanies.
Wow, that's beautiful. And we end up lighting up our lives with the stories that we tell, which you've got an event coming up that can really help people jump into this process, right?
Yes, I found that I have ongoing workshops, and I found that there's some technique to learn of what improvisation is in terms of writing. So I do a 4-week orientation class where we work with the creative tools and free writing and the prompts and how to create stories. And yeah, so I have one of those events coming up.
Great. So tell us a little bit more about it. How can people contact you or
Yes, they can go to creativelife.com where I will have a link to whatever the newest orientation, introductory improvisational writing is.
Mhm.
And yeah, or they can get a hold of me at creativelife1@me.com.
And that's one like the number, Creative
Yeah,
Life number one. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm on Facebook, Kelly Morgan, Creative Life. It's not hard to find me.
That
So
is great. What is your biggest hope out of doing this next class that you're going to be doing?
my hope always is that that anyone, I don't care if they're experienced or not experienced, can tell their stories in a way that light up the world. And when we do that, we find our own healing in it. We learn how to tell it in a way that resonates for others. We heal the world. And so I would just love to work with everyone to facilitate them in sharing their stories with others, to create greater understanding and to be better writers and to publish whatever they want to do.
That sounds beautiful. Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.